They threw her into the dungeon to die. Not just any dungeon, the one that held him. The feral beast that had already torn apart 3 guards. The monster everyone whispered about in terrified voices. And Nora Belwyn, accused of treason she didn't commit, had exactly 1 night before that creature ripped her to shreds. But what the court didn't know, what no one knew, was that the beast wasn't just a monster. He was Dominic Crow, the missing Lycan king, trapped in a nightmare of fur and fangs by the very council that now condemned her to death. One innocent Omega. One cursed Alpha. One impossible night that would shatter a kingdom. This is their story. Stay until the end to see how an outcast servant becomes a queen, and don't forget to hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. You won't believe how this ends. Mkant. Part 1. The iron door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through Nora's bones. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps as the footsteps of the guards faded up the spiral staircase. The torch they'd carried disappeared with them, leaving her in a darkness so complete it felt alive, pressing against her skin, filling her lungs, suffocating her with its weight. "Please," she had begged them. "Please, I didn't do anything. I'm innocent." Their laughter had been her only answer, cruel, mocking laughter that followed her all the way down into this hole beneath the castle. The dungeon. The dungeon. Everyone in the Silverstone Kingdom knew about this place. It was where they'd thrown the beast 6 months ago, after it had killed Lord Rothman's son in a rage, where it had torn apart Guard Captain Brennick when he'd tried to chain it, where it had ripped through 2 more guards just 3 weeks past, painting the stone walls with their blood. And now, Nora was locked inside with it. Trial by ordeal, Magistrate Van had called it, his thin lips curling into a smile that never reached his cold gray eyes. If you survive until dawn, the court will reconsider your sentence. If the beast kills you, he'd shrugged, smoothing down his burgundy robes, then clearly the gods have rendered their verdict. Nora had wanted to scream that this wasn't justice, it was murder. But the words had died in her throat when she'd seen the faces of the nobles in the gallery. Lord Pemberton, smirking behind his jeweled fingers. Lady Ashworth, her painted lips twisted in satisfaction. Even young Baron Creed, who'd once smiled kindly at her when she'd served him wine, now looked at her with nothing but contempt. They wanted her to die. Not because they truly believed she'd stolen the Queen's ruby necklace, the one that had mysteriously appeared in her quarters that morning, wrapped in her spare apron. No, they wanted her dead because she was nothing, nobody. An Omega servant girl with no family, no status, no voice that mattered. The perfect scapegoat. Her eyes were beginning to adjust to the darkness now, picking out shapes in the gloom. The dungeon was larger than she'd expected. A circular chamber perhaps 30 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadow. The walls were smooth stone, worn by centuries of moisture, and the floor. Nora's stomach turned. The floor was stained. Dark patches that could only be old blood spread in violent spatters and smears. Evidence of what happened to those who'd come before her. A sound cut through the silence, low, guttural, somewhere between a growl and a breath. Nora's heart seized in her chest. Her eyes darted frantically around the chamber, searching for the source, but the darkness was too thick. The sound came again, closer this time, and with it came a smell, wet fur, old blood, and something wild that made every instinct in her body scream run. But there was nowhere to run. "Hello?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. The growling stopped. Silence flooded back, even more terrifying than the sound had been. Nora's pulse hammered in her ears. She could feel her Omega nature rising inside her, that deep primal part of herself that could sense danger, that could read the emotions and energies of others. It was screaming at her now, a chorus of warning that made her skin crawl. Predator, predator, predator. Then she saw it. 2 eyes glowing like embers in the darkness, level with her own. Which meant the creature wasn't crouched or on all fours. It was standing. Nora's breath caught. The eyes moved closer, and with them came the sound of claws scraping against stone. Slow, deliberate. The creature was in no hurry. It knew she had nowhere to go. A shaft of moonlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling high above, and in that pale silver glow, Nora finally saw the beast. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill half the chamber. Its body was covered in thick, dark fur that looked almost black in the shadows, and its limbs were grotesquely muscular, ending in claws that gleamed like knives. The head was the worst, a twisted fusion of wolf and something nightmarish, with 2 long jaws filled with teeth designed to tear flesh from bone. But it was the eyes that held her frozen. They weren't the mindless, savage eyes of an animal. There was intelligence there, and pain. Such terrible, agonizing pain that for a moment Nora forgot to be afraid. The beast took another step toward her, and she saw how it moved. Not with the fluid grace of a predator, but with a jerking, struggling gait, as if every movement caused it suffering. Its breathing was ragged, harsh, each breath sounding like it was being pulled through broken glass. "You're hurt," Nora whispered. The words were out before she could stop them. Idiotic words, suicidal words. What did it matter if the beast was hurt? It was still going to kill her. But the creature stopped. Its ember eyes widened slightly, and its massive head tilted to one side, as if it couldn't quite believe what it had heard. The growling died completely, replaced by heavy, panting breaths that fogged in the cold air. Nora's Omega instincts were quieting now, shifting from pure terror to something more complex. She could feel the beast's emotions bleeding into the space between them. Rage, yes, but underneath that there was confusion, desperation. And beneath even that, buried so deep she almost missed it, a tiny spark of hope. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly, though the absurdity of the statement almost made her laugh. As if she could hurt this creature, as if she was the danger here. The beast made a sound, something between a whine and a growl. It took another step forward, bringing it within arm's reach, and Nora had to fight every instinct not to bolt. Its scent washed over her, stronger now, and she realized with a start that beneath the blood and the wildness there was something else, something that made her Omega nature stir in a way it never had before. Cedar and smoke, winter frost and ancient stone, alpha. This wasn't just any beast. It was a Lycan alpha, one so powerful that even in this cursed form, its presence made her knees weak. The creature leaned down, bringing its massive head close to hers. Nora could see its teeth now, each one as long as her finger, stained with old blood. It could kill her in half a heartbeat. One snap of those jaws and her throat would be gone. But it didn't attack. Instead, it sniffed her, long, deep breaths that ruffled her dark hair. Its nose, wet and cold, brushed against her neck, her shoulder, her collarbone. Nora stood perfectly still, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst, as the beast catalogued her scent. Then it made a sound she'd never expected. A whimper. The creature pulled back slightly, and in the moonlight, Nora saw something that made her breath catch. Its eyes, those burning amber eyes, were wet. The beast was crying. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, you poor thing." She didn't think. Later, she would realize how insane it was, how utterly suicidal. But in that moment, guided by instincts she didn't fully understand, Nora reached out and placed her hand on the creature's massive head. It flinched at the contact, a full-body shudder running through its enormous frame, but it didn't pull away. If anything, it leaned into her touch. A broken, desperate sound emerging from deep in its chest. Nora's fingers found matted fur, dried blood, and beneath it all, old scars. So many scars. This creature had been hurt again and again, and no one had helped it. No one had tried. "It's okay," she murmured, using the same gentle voice she'd used with the stable cats when she'd worked in the kitchens. "You're not alone anymore. I'm here." The beast's breathing was changing, becoming less ragged. Some of the tension was bleeding out of its muscles. Nora could feel it through their connection, her Omega nature reaching out to soothe, to calm, to heal. And for the first time since she'd been thrown into this dungeon, she wasn't afraid. The creature suddenly pulled away, stumbling backward with surprising clumsiness. It shook its massive head, as if trying to clear it, and when it looked at her again, there was confusion in its eyes. It made a questioning sound, almost like words, but too garbled and broken to understand. "I don't know what they did to you," Nora said quietly, "but I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this." The beast stared at her for a long moment, then turned and retreated to the far side of the chamber. It settled into the shadows with its back against the wall, those ember eyes never leaving her face. Nora slowly slid down the wall behind her until she was sitting on the cold stone floor. Her legs were shaking too badly to hold her up anymore. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her exhausted and trembling, but alive. She was still alive. "My name is Nora," she told the darkness, not sure if the creature could understand her, but needing to fill the silence. "Nora Belwyn. I worked in the castle kitchens until they decided I was a thief." The beast shifted in the shadows, listening. "I didn't steal that necklace," Nora continued, hugging her knees to her chest. "Someone planted it in my room. I don't know who or why, but they made sure I'd be blamed." She laughed bitterly. "Not that it matters. Who's going to believe an Omega servant over a magistrate and half the noble houses?" A low rumble came from across the chamber, not threatening, but almost sympathetic. "They said you killed people," Nora said, looking toward those glowing eyes. 4 guards. Is that true?" The beast didn't respond, but she felt the wave of emotion that rolled off it. Guilt, horror, shame. "You didn't want to, did you?" Nora's voice softened. "Something made you, something you couldn't control." The creature let out a long, mournful howl that echoed through the dungeon and pierced straight through Nora's heart. It was the sound of someone trapped in their own private hell, screaming for a release that would never come. Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." They sat like that for what felt like hours. The broken beast and the condemned Omega, 2 souls the world had decided were worthless. Nora found herself talking, telling the creature things she'd never told anyone. About growing up in the orphanage after her parents died of fever when she was 3. About being placed in service at the castle when she turned 15. About the small kindnesses she'd witnessed and the casual cruelties she'd endured. "There was this one alpha," she said softly, "a few years ago. He came to the castle for the spring festival. I only saw him once, but I'll never forget it. He was magnificent, tall, with dark hair, and these incredible green eyes. When he walked into a room, everyone just stopped. Even the king deferred to him." The beast had gone very still. "They said he was Dominic Crow, the Lycan king from the Northern Territories. He was only at the castle for 1 night, but the servants whispered about him for months afterward, about how powerful he was, how fair, how he'd united 3 warring packs and brought peace to the borderlands." Nora pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Then, about 6 months ago, there were rumors. They said King Dominic had gone missing, that he'd vanished from his own throne room in the middle of the night. Some people thought he'd been assassinated. Others said he'd abandoned his kingdom." She paused. "I always wondered what really happened to him." A sound made her look up. The beast had moved closer while she'd been talking, and was now sitting just a few feet away, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked. "What is it?" The creature reached out one massive clawed hand and gently, so gently, touched her face. Its touch was surprisingly warm, and Nora could feel it trembling. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. "No," she breathed. "It can't be. You're not—" The beast pulled its hand back and nodded. Once, deliberately. Nora's mind reeled. "You're him? You're Dominic Crow, the Lycan king?" Another nod. "But how? What happened to you?" The beast, Dominic, made a frustrated sound and pawed at the ground. It tried to speak, and Nora could hear words struggling to form, but his transformed throat couldn't shape them properly. What came out was a garbled mess of growls and broken syllables. "Your council," Nora said, pieces falling into place. "They did this to you. That's why Magistrate Vane is sitting on the throne. Why he's making all the decisions. They cursed you and locked you away so they could take your power." Dominic's eyes blazed with fury and affirmation. "And they've been ruling in your place for 6 months, and no one knows." Nora felt sick. All those decrees that Vane passed, the new taxes on Omegas, the restrictions on pack movements, oh gods, the executions. 3 pack leaders had been executed for treason in the past 6 months. All 3 had been loyal to Dominic. "They're eliminating everyone who would question them," Nora said. Everyone who might figure out what they've done. She looked at Dominic. And now they've thrown me in here because why? Did I see something I shouldn't have? But even as she asked, she knew that wasn't it. She was nobody, a kitchen servant who barely registered to the nobles. She hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard anything that would make her a threat. Unless it wasn't about what she knew, unless it was about what she was. Oh, Nora breathed. Oh no. Dominic tilted his head, questioning. The timing, Nora said slowly. You've been in this form for 6 months, and they've kept you alive all this time, even though it would be easier to kill you. Why? Unless... She met his eyes. Unless the curse has an expiration date, or a breaking condition. Dominic went very still. And if that condition involves another person, specifically an Omega, then they'd need to make sure no Omega ever got close to you. So they've been feeding you guards, alphas and betas. People you'd see as threats in this form. People who'd make the beast rage instead of... Dominic suddenly lunged forward, but not to attack. He pressed his massive head against her shoulder, a desperate, pleading gesture. Nora's hand came up automatically to stroke his fur. Instead of calming down, she finished softly, they needed you to stay feral, stay lost in the beast. But an Omega's nature is to soothe, to heal, so they made sure no Omega would ever... Pain exploded through their connection, so intense that Nora gasped. Dominic was shaking, his whole body convulsing as if fighting against invisible chains. The curse, Nora realized. It's fighting back. It doesn't want you to be calm. It doesn't want you to remember who you are. Dominic pulled away from her, stumbling across the chamber. His claws scrabbled against the stone as he fought for control. The beast was rising again. She could see it, the intelligence in his eyes flickering, dimming, being swallowed by pure animal rage. No, Nora said firmly, standing up. No, you don't get to give up. Not now. She crossed the space between them, ignoring the warning growls that rumbled from his chest. When she reached him, she cupped his massive face in both her hands and forced him to look at her. Dominic Crow, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Lycan King of the Northern Territories, you're not a beast, you're not a monster. You're a king, and your people need you. The growling intensified, but she didn't let go. I know you're in there, Nora continued. I can feel you, and I'm not going to let some 2-bit curse and a corrupt council steal you away. Do you hear me? I'm not going to let them win. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the rage in Dominic's eyes began to recede. The tension in his muscles eased, his breathing slowed. When he looked at her again, it was with complete clarity. Nora smiled. There you are. Dominic made a sound that might have been a laugh if his throat could have shaped it. Then he did something that shocked her. He lowered himself to the ground and laid his head in her lap, trusting her completely. Nora ran her fingers through his fur, finding the rhythm that seemed to soothe him most. We'll figure this out, she promised. I don't know how yet, but we will. You're not alone anymore. As she sat there in the darkness, comforting the cursed king, Nora felt something stirring inside her, a warmth spreading through her chest like a flame catching hold. It was unfamiliar and yet completely right, as if something that had been dormant her entire life was finally waking up. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But as the hours crept toward dawn, and as Dominic's breathing evened out into something almost peaceful for the first time in 6 months, Nora Belwyn made a decision. She wasn't going to die in this dungeon, and neither was he. Whatever it took, whatever she had to do, she was going to save them both. The corrupt council thought they'd won, thought they'd eliminated the last threat to their stolen power by throwing a worthless Omega girl to the beast. But they'd made a mistake. They'd given Dominic Crow exactly what he needed to break free, and they'd given Nora Belwyn a reason to fight. As the first hints of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the ceiling, painting the dungeon in shades of gray and gold, neither of them knew that the worst was yet to come, that the curse would fight back with everything it had, that the connection forming between them would be tested in ways that would break lesser souls. All they knew, in that moment, was that they'd found each other. And somehow, that would have to be enough. The first rays of sunlight touched Nora's face like a warning. She jerked awake, momentarily disoriented, her back aching from where she'd slumped against the stone wall. Dominic was already on his feet, his massive form silhouetted against the growing light from above. His entire body was rigid, trembling, and the low growl emanating from his chest made the hair on her arms stand up. "What's wrong?" Nora scrambled to her feet, her heart already racing. Dominic's head swung toward the iron door at the top of the stairs. His lips pulled back from his teeth in a vicious snarl, and Nora heard it too, footsteps. Multiple sets descending the spiral staircase. "They're coming to check if I'm dead," Nora whispered. The beast let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the dungeon. He positioned himself between Nora and the door, every muscle coiled to attack, and she realized with a sickening clarity what was about to happen. When those guards opened the door and saw her alive, saw her standing calmly beside the beast that should have torn her apart, they would know something had changed. They would report back to Vane and the council, and whatever fragile hope they'd found in the darkness would be crushed before it could grow. The footsteps grew louder. "Dominic," Nora said urgently, "you have to—" But she never finished the sentence. The iron door swung open with a screech of protesting hinges, and 3 guards stepped through, their torches blazing. Behind them, resplendent in his burgundy robes, stood Magistrate Marcus Vane himself. "Well," Vane said, his thin voice dripping with false surprise, "the little Omega survived the night. How unexpected." The lead guard, a burly alpha named Crenshaw, descended the stairs with his hand on his sword. "Stand away from the beast, girl. We're taking you to a—" Dominic's roar cut him off. The beast launched forward with terrifying speed, and Crenshaw barely had time to draw his blade before those massive claws were slashing through the air where his throat had been a moment before. "Subdue it!" Vane shouted from the safety of the doorway. "Use the chains!" The other 2 guards rushed forward with silver-laced nets, the kind designed specifically for containing lichens. Dominic tore through the first net like it was paper, his rage given physical form. The guard wielding it went flying, slamming into the wall with a sickening crack. "Stop!" Nora screamed. "Please, you're making it worse!" But no one was listening. Crenshaw had recovered and was advancing with his sword, while the 3rd guard circled around, trying to flank the beast. Dominic's eyes were pure feral now, the intelligence Nora had worked so hard to reach buried beneath layers of bloodlust and protective fury. He was trying to defend her, and it was going to get him killed. "Dominic, no!" Nora threw herself forward, directly into the path of his next attack. His claws stopped inches from her face, trembling with the effort of holding back. For one heartbeat, their eyes met, and she saw him in there, the king, the man, fighting desperately against the beast. Then Crenshaw's sword plunged into Dominic's shoulder. The beast howled in pain and rage, spinning to face his attacker. Blood sprayed across the stone floor. Too much blood, too red, too real. Dominic's claws found Crenshaw's armor and tore through it like cloth. The guard screamed. "Enough!" Vane's voice cracked like a whip. "Stand down, all of you!" Something in his tone made everyone freeze. Even Dominic paused, though his chest heaved with panting breaths and Crenshaw's blood dripped from his claws. Vane descended the stairs slowly, his cold gray eyes taking in every detail of the scene. When his gaze fell on Nora, she saw calculation there, wheels turning behind that cruel intelligence. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The beast responds to you." He took another step closer. "Tell me, Miss Belwyn, did you discover something interesting during your long night in the dark?" Nora's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to protect what she'd learned, but Vane's eyes told her he already suspected, already knew. "He's not just a beast," she heard herself say. "He's cursed. Someone did this to him." Did they now? Vane's smile was reptilian. "And did this cursed creature happen to tell you who he was? Before the transformation, I mean?" The question was a trap. Nora could feel the jaws of it closing around her, but she couldn't see a way out. If she denied knowing, Vane would simply have Dominic killed, and her along with him. If she confirmed it— "He didn't have to tell me," Nora said carefully. "I recognized him. From the Spring Festival 3 years ago, when King Dominic Crow visited the castle." The silence that followed was absolute. Vane's face went through a remarkable transformation. Surprise flickered across his features, followed quickly by fury, then settling into something far more dangerous— respect. "Clever girl," he said softly. "Much cleverer than I gave you credit for." He turned to the guards. "Crenshaw, You'll live. Get yourself to the healers. The rest of you out. Now. But sir, the third guard began. Out! They fled, Crenshaw clutching his torn armor, leaving Nora and Dominic alone with the magistrate. Vane waited until their footsteps had faded completely before speaking again. You've created quite the problem for me, Miss Belwyn, he said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. The plan was simple. You'd die. The beast would remain feral, and no one would ever know that our dear king was rotting in this dungeon while I made the difficult decisions his weakness prevented him from making. Difficult decisions? Nora's voice shook with anger. You mean executing his loyal supporters? Taxing Omegas into poverty? Selling pack lands to foreign... Necessary measures, Vane interrupted smoothly, for the good of the kingdom. Dominic was too soft, too concerned with being loved to do what needed to be done. The kingdom doesn't need a beloved king. It needs a strong one. Dominic growled, a sound so full of menace that even Vane took an involuntary step back. But the magistrate recovered quickly, his hand moving to a small vial hanging from his belt. Careful, your majesty, Vane said mockingly. One drop of this, and the curse intensifies tenfold. You'll lose yourself completely, become nothing but a mindless killing machine. He smiled. Though I suppose that might be preferable to what you are now, a monster who remembers being a man. You're the monster, Nora said. You and your council. How did you even do this? How did you curse a lichen king? Magic, of course, Vane said. Ancient, dark, and very, very expensive. It required calling in favors from beings you wouldn't want to meet in your nightmares. But it was worth it. His eyes gleamed. The curse is quite elegant, really, triggered by a blood oath among the council members, tied to Dominic's own power source. The stronger he is, the stronger the curse. The more he fights it, the more feral he becomes. And the breaking condition? Nora pressed. There's always a breaking condition. Vane's smile widened. Ah, yes. The weakness every curse must have. In this case, it's quite romantic, actually. True love's bond, a mate connection, fully awakened and accepted before the next full moon. He glanced up at the ceiling, where the morning sun was now streaming through. Which is, let's see, 14 days from now. Nora's heart sank. 14 days. 2 weeks to break a curse that had been crafted by ancient dark magic while locked in a dungeon, surrounded by enemies. Even if such a bond existed, Vane continued, it would require both parties to accept it willingly, completely, with no doubt or hesitation. The Omega would need to fully claim the Alpha as their mate, and he would need to do the same, all while the curse fights them every step of the way. He laughed. Impossible, really, which is why we chose it. Why not just kill him? Nora demanded. Why keep him alive at all? Because dead kings become martyrs, Vane said simply. And martyrs inspire rebellions. As long as Dominic is alive, even in this form, there's always the possibility that he might return. A possibility that we control. But a dead king? That's a mystery that would haunt us. People would ask questions, demand answers. Some fool would inevitably try to avenge him. He shook his head. No, it's much cleaner this way. Let him rot in beast form while I rule in his name. Everyone's happy. Except the people you're destroying, Nora said. The weak are always destroyed, Vane replied. That's the nature of the world. Only the strong survive, Miss Belwyn. Surely as an Omega, you understand that better than most. The casual cruelty of his words hit Nora like a physical blow, because he was right, in a way. She'd spent her whole life being overlooked, dismissed, treated as less than. The world had taught her again and again that her value was measured by her submission, her usefulness to those above her. But standing here, with Dominic's blood still wet on the stone, with 14 days until the full moon and a kingdom rotting from within, Nora felt something shift inside her, fury, pure, righteous fury that burned away the fear and the doubt and the lifetime of learned helplessness. You're wrong, she said quietly. Vane raised an eyebrow. Am I? Strength isn't about power or cruelty. It's about what you're willing to fight for, what you're willing to sacrifice. Nora took a step forward. And I'm willing to sacrifice everything to stop you. For the first time, genuine surprise crossed Vane's face. Then he laughed, a sharp, barking sound that echoed through the dungeon. You, a kitchen servant with delusions of heroism. He shook his head, still chuckling. My dear girl, you don't even have standing to testify at your own trial. What exactly do you think you can do to stop me? I can break the curse, Nora said. The laughter died. Vane's expression went cold. No, he said flatly. You can't. Do you know why? Because even if, and this is a massive if, even if you somehow manage to forge a true mate bond with our feral king here in the next 2 weeks, you'd still need to perform the acceptance ritual, which requires witnesses. Specifically, it requires the blessing of the ruling council. Nora's hope crumbled. Your council. Precisely. Vane's smile returned. Even if you accomplish the impossible and awaken the bond, I would simply refuse to acknowledge it. No blessing, no breaking of the curse. Dominic stays a beast, and you, well, you'll have to be dealt with in a more permanent fashion, I'm afraid. He turned toward the stairs, then paused. I'll give you credit, Miss Belwyn. You've shown remarkable resilience. Under different circumstances, that might have been admirable. He glanced back at her. But in the end, you are still just an Omega. And Omegas don't change the world, they serve it. The iron door clanged shut behind him, and Nora heard the sound of multiple locks sliding into place. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, Vane's words echoing in her head. Then she felt Dominic's presence beside her, his massive bulk radiating heat and pain. She turned to find him watching her with those intelligent, amber eyes, and in them she saw the same question she was asking herself. What now? He's right about one thing, Nora said, her voice hollow. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm nobody, nothing, a servant who should have died in this dungeon. She looked down at her hands, still trembling from the confrontation. I can't break ancient curses. I can't fight corrupt councils. I can't... A low rumble interrupted her spiral. Dominic moved closer, and despite his monstrous form, despite the blood and claws and nightmare appearance, his touch was gentle when he pressed his forehead against hers. Through their connection, that strange, growing warmth in her chest, Nora felt what he was trying to tell her. You're not nothing. You're everything. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how to save you. He pulled back and looked at her, really looked at her, and somehow she understood. He wasn't asking her to save him. He was asking her to try. Okay, Nora whispered. Okay, we have 14 days. She wiped her eyes, straightening her spine. Vane said the curse feeds on your strength. So what if we don't fight it? What if we work with it instead? Dominic tilted his head, questioning. You're strongest when you're calm, Nora continued, thinking out loud. When you're in control. The beast only takes over when you're threatened or angry. So what if we focus on keeping you grounded? Keeping you. She could see the doubt in his eyes. 6 months he'd been trapped in this form, fighting every day to hold on to his humanity. 6 months of losing that battle over and over again. I know it sounds impossible, Nora said, but we have something Vane doesn't expect. We have each other. As she said it, that warmth in her chest flared brighter. It wasn't just her Omega nature responding to an Alpha in need. It was something deeper, more fundamental, something that felt like recognition, like coming home. The mate bond, Nora breathed. It's already starting, isn't it? That's why I can feel your emotions. Why touching you calms the beast. Dominic made a sound of confirmation, but there was warning in it too. She felt what he was trying to tell her through their connection. The bond was dangerous. It would make them vulnerable to each other. If it fully formed and then broke, it would destroy them both. I don't care, Nora said fiercely. I don't care about the risk. I'd rather die trying to save you than live knowing I didn't. Something shifted in Dominic's eyes. The amber glow intensified, and Nora felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked her off her feet. Gratitude, wonder, and beneath it all the first stirrings of something that felt like... The dungeon door burst open again. This time it wasn't guards. It was a woman in the silver robes of the High Council, flanked by 2 court officials. Her ice-blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her blue eyes were as cold as winter frost. Lady Ashworth, Nora said, recognizing her from the trial. Magistrate Vane has informed me of your claims. Lady Ashworth said, descending the stairs with practiced grace. About the beast's true identity. It's not a claim, Nora said. It's the truth. That's King Dominic Crow, and your council cursed him. Impossible, Lady Ashworth said smoothly. King Dominic disappeared 6 months ago. He abandoned his throne and his people. This beast was captured trying to slaughter innocent travelers on the king's road. Lies! Nora's hands clenched into fists. You know exactly what you did. You and Vane and the rest of the council. Lady Ashworth's expression didn't change. These are serious accusations, Miss Belwyn. Treason, in fact. Accusing council members of conspiracy against the crown. She smiled, and it was every bit as cold as Vane's had been. Of course, given that you've already been convicted of theft, I suppose adding treason to your list of crimes hardly matters. Why are you here? Nora demanded. To make you an offer. Lady Ashworth folded her hands primly. You'll recant your wild accusations about the beast. You'll admit that your night in the dungeon left you confused, traumatized, that you made up stories to cope with the horror of nearly being killed. And in exchange? In exchange, we'll commute your execution to exile. You'll be escorted to the border and released. You'll never set foot in the Silverstone Kingdom again, but you'll live. Lady Ashworth's eyes glittered. Refuse, and you'll hang tomorrow at dawn in the public square. A fitting end for a treasonous thief. Dominic's growl started low but built to a roar. He moved between Nora and Lady Ashworth, his message clear. They'd have to go through him to get to her. How touching, Lady Ashworth said dryly. But the beast's attachment to you only proves how dangerous this situation has become. We can't have rumors spreading that the creature is anything other than what it appears. The people need stability, not wild conspiracy theories about cursed kings. Nora's mind raced. If she accepted the exile, she'd be free. She could run, disappear, maybe find help somewhere beyond the kingdom's borders. But Dominic would remain trapped here, alone, fighting a losing battle against the curse until the full moon came and went and he was lost forever. If she refused, she'd die. And Dominic would still be trapped, but with even less hope than before. Either way, Vane and his council won. There's a third option, Nora said slowly. Lady Ashworth's eyebrow arched. Oh? Trial by combat. The silence that followed was so profound that Nora could hear the distant drip of water somewhere in the dungeon's depths. Then Lady Ashworth laughed. It was a genuine laugh, full of delighted surprise. Trial by combat, she repeated. You, an Omega servant with no combat training, wish to challenge the charges against you through ritual combat? She shook her head, still chuckling. My dear girl, you'd need a champion to fight on your behalf. And who exactly do you think would be willing to stand for you? Nora looked at Dominic. Him. The laughter stopped. The beast? Lady Ashworth's voice had gone very flat. You want to use the beast as your champion? Why not? Nora challenged. The law is clear. Any defendant has the right to trial by combat, and they may choose any willing champion to fight on their behalf. I choose him. The law refers to people, not monsters. Then prove he's just a monster, Nora said. Accept the challenge. If he's nothing but a mindless beast, he'll lose. Problem solved. She took a step forward. But if he wins, if he fights with intelligence and purpose and proves he's more than what you claim, then maybe people will start asking questions. Questions about where the beast really came from. Questions about what happened to King Dominic. She could see the calculation in Lady Ashworth's eyes, the rapid assessment of risks and benefits. Accepting the challenge was dangerous. There was a real chance Dominic could win, even in his cursed form. But refusing would look suspicious, would make people wonder what the council was hiding. If I accept, Lady Ashworth said carefully, and the beast somehow manages to defeat our champion, what then? You'd still need to break the curse to prove your wild theory, and we've already established that's impossible without the council's blessing. One problem at a time, Nora said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Lady Ashworth studied her for a long moment, those cold blue eyes seeming to weigh Nora's soul. Finally she nodded. Very well. Trial by combat it is. She smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted easy prey. 3 days from now, In the public arena. Our champion against your beast. To the death. To surrender, Nora corrected quickly. First blood and surrender. To the death, Lady Ashworth repeated firmly. Those are the terms. Accept them or hang tomorrow. Nora looked at Dominic. Through their growing bond, she could feel his response, acceptance, determination, and a fierce protectiveness that made her chest ache. We accept, Nora said. Excellent. Lady Ashworth turned to leave, then paused at the base of the stairs. One more thing, Miss Belwyn. Our champion will be Commander Braddock. I believe you know of him. Nora's blood turned to ice. Everyone knew Commander Braddock. He was the kingdom's greatest warrior. An alpha who'd never lost a fight in 30 years of service. He'd trained the Royal Guard, led armies to victory, and was said to be able to kill a man with his bare hands in under 3 seconds. And they were going to pit Dominic against him. Not Dominic the King, the trained warrior, the powerful Lycan alpha in full control of his abilities, but Dominic the cursed beast fighting on instinct and rage, wounded and weakened by 6 months in this dungeon. May fortune favor you, Lady Ashworth said, though her tone made it clear she thought fortune had already chosen its side. The door clanged shut once more, and Nora sank to the ground, her legs finally giving out. What did I just do? She whispered. Dominic settled beside her, his presence warm and solid. Through their bond, she felt his response. Not fear or recrimination, but something like pride. 3 days, Nora said, looking up at him. We have 3 days to get you ready to fight the greatest warrior in the kingdom while you're trapped in a form you can barely control. She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. This is insane. But Dominic's eyes were steady, certain. He believed they could do this. Believed in her. Okay, Nora said, forcing herself to breathe. Okay. First, we need to work on your control. The beast only takes over when you're threatened or emotional, right? So we practice staying calm, staying grounded. She spent the next hour talking to him, telling him stories, anything to keep him present and focused. She told him about her childhood in the orphanage, about the cook who'd been kind to her, about the garden where she used to hide when the other servants were cruel. And slowly, gradually, she felt the beast receding, felt Dominic's human consciousness becoming stronger, more stable. It wasn't enough. 3 days would never be enough. But it was all they had. As the sun climbed higher, painting the dungeon in shades of gold, Nora made a silent vow. She didn't know if they could win, didn't know if the bond between them would be enough to break the curse or defeat Braddock or overcome the council's corruption. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going to give up. Not on Dominic, not on herself, not on the possibility that maybe, just maybe, an Omega servant and a cursed king could change the world after all. 3 days until the trial, 14 days until the full moon, and a kingdom's fate hanging in the balance. The afternoon of the first day brought an unexpected visitor. Nora was working with Dominic on breath control, a technique she'd read about once in a book about meditation that the castle librarian had let her borrow, when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Different from the heavy boots of guards. Lighter, quicker. A young woman appeared in the doorway, carrying a basket covered with cloth. She couldn't have been more than 20, with copper-red hair pulled into a messy braid and freckles scattered across her nose. She wore the simple brown dress of a kitchen servant. Don't come any closer, Nora warned, moving instinctively between the girl and Dominic. He's dangerous when startled. No, he's not. The girl descended the stairs with surprising confidence. Not with you here, anyway. The whole castle's talking about it. How the beast that killed 4 guards won't even growl when you're near him. Dominic tensed, a low rumble building in his chest, but Nora placed her hand on his shoulder and felt him settle. Who are you? Nora asked. Mira. I work in the kitchens. Worked with you, actually, though you probably don't remember me. I mostly handled the scullery. She set the basket down and pulled back the cloth, revealing bread, cheese, dried meat, and a clay jug. Figured you might be hungry. They're not exactly rushing to feed the condemned. Nora's stomach growled at the sight of food. She hadn't eaten since before the trial, and the hunger hit her all at once, making her dizzy. Why are you helping us? Nora asked suspiciously. Mira's expression hardened. Because I was there. 3 months ago, when they raised the Omega taxes again. My sister couldn't pay. They took her daughter as collateral, Said she'd work in the noble houses until the debt was settled. Her hands clenched. My niece is 7 years old. 7. And she's serving wine to the same bastards who took her mother's last copper. I'm sorry, Nora said softly. Don't be sorry. Win. Mira looked at Dominic, her eyes sharp. If what they're saying is true, if he really is the king, then everything changes. King Dominic never would have allowed what Vane's been doing. He cared about people like us. How do you know? Nora asked. You said you were in the scullery. You never would have seen him. My aunt was a lady's maid to the queen before she died. Mira's voice softened. She told me stories about how King Dominic would walk through the servant quarters, learning names, asking about families, how he once fired a noble for beating his stable boy, how he reduced taxes on omegas and betas because he said strength comes from taking care of your people, not bleeding them dry. Through their bond, Nora felt Dominic's response. Grief for a kingdom he'd lost and a fierce determination to reclaim it. The trial by combat, Mira continued, words spreading fast. Half the castle thinks you're insane for challenging the charges. The other half, she paused. The other half is hoping you win. Against Commander Braddock? Nora shook her head. That's not hope. That's delusion. Maybe. Mira moved closer, dropping her voice. But there's something you should know. Something the council doesn't want getting out. Nora leaned in. Braddock's been different lately, since about 6 months ago. Mira's eyes flicked to Dominic. Right around the time the king disappeared and this beast showed up. He's been training obsessively, like he's preparing for something specific, and I've seen him coming out of meetings with Vane looking wrong. Sick, almost. What are you saying? I'm saying the council's been planning this for a long time. They knew you'd choose the beast as your champion. Maybe they even set it up that way. And they've been preparing Braddock for exactly this fight. A chill ran down Nora's spine. How would they prepare for fighting a cursed Lycan king? I don't know, Mira admitted. But my aunt mentioned something else, about a special weapon that was commissioned right before King Dominic disappeared. Silver alloy mixed with something called nightshade essence. Supposed to be deadly to Lycans, even in their strongest form. Dominic's growl erupted like thunder. His eyes blazed amber gold, and Nora felt the rage pouring through their bond. Rage at the betrayal, at the premeditation, at the council's cold calculation. Easy, Nora murmured, pressing both hands against his chest. Easy. We know now. We can prepare. But how? How did you prepare to fight against a weapon designed specifically to kill you? There's more, Mira said. The arena's been modified. They've installed new barriers, silver reinforced, blessed by the court mage. They're saying it's for spectator safety, but she bit her lip. The configuration doesn't make sense unless they're trying to limit the beast's movement. Create a killing box. They're not planning a fair fight, Nora said flatly. They're planning an execution. Of course they are. Mira's jaw set. But that doesn't mean you can't win. You just need to be smarter than them. Nora wanted to laugh. She was an Omega servant with no combat training, no political power, and no resources beyond a cursed king who could barely control his own form. How exactly was she supposed to outsmart a council of experienced manipulators with the full resources of the kingdom behind them? But Mira was looking at her with such fierce hope, such desperate belief that Nora couldn't bring herself to voice those doubts. Thank you, Nora said instead. For the food, for the information, for believing. Don't thank me yet. Mira headed for the stairs, then paused. My sister's in the crowd sometimes. When they do public executions or trials, she brings my niece to watch, trying to teach her how the world works. Her voice cracked. I don't want my niece growing up thinking this is normal, that people like us don't matter. After Mira left, Nora and Dominic ate in silence. The food was simple but good, and Nora forced herself to finish every bite, knowing she'd need her strength. 2 more days, she said to Dominic. We need a plan that doesn't involve you just charging at Braddock and hoping for the best. Dominic made a sound that might have been agreement or frustration. It was hard to tell in his current form, but through their bond, Nora felt something new. Not just determination or protectiveness, but actual tactical thinking. The king was still in there, the military leader who'd united warring packs and defended his borders. They just needed to reach him. "Tell me about fighting," Nora said. "Show me how you move." For the next several hours, Dominic demonstrated. It was clumsy at first. His cursed form didn't move the way his Lycan form had, and the beast kept trying to take over, turning strategy into wild slashing. But Nora kept pulling him back, kept grounding him with her touch and her voice, and gradually she began to see patterns. "You're faster than you think," she observed. "When you're calm, you can move without telegraphing, but when the beast takes over, you broadcast every attack." Dominic rumbled agreement. "And Braddock will be looking for the beast," Nora continued, her mind racing. "He'll be expecting rage and chaos. So what if we give him the opposite? What if we use your human intelligence to counter his experience?" It was a gamble, and a massive, potentially fatal gamble, but it was the only advantage they had. They worked through the night, developing signals, a specific pattern Nora could tap on his shoulder to mean left, another for right, another for wait. Dominic's mind was sharp enough to understand, but his cursed body struggled to obey. The disconnect between what he wanted to do and what the beast allowed him to do was agonizing to watch. "We'll keep practicing," Nora promised as dawn broke on the second day. "We'll make this work." But doubt was creeping in, cold and insidious. Even if Dominic could maintain control during the fight, even if they somehow managed to defeat Braddock despite the poisoned weapon and the modified arena, what then? The Council would never bless their mate bond, never allow the curse to break, unless they forced the issue. The idea came to Nora suddenly, fully formed, and so audacious that she actually gasped. "What if we don't wait for their blessing?" she said aloud. Dominic's head swiveled toward her, questioning. "The acceptance ritual," Nora explained, her words tumbling out faster. "Vane said it requires witnesses and the Council's blessing. But what if we perform it publicly? In the arena, in front of thousands of people, the Council couldn't refuse without explaining why. And if they did refuse..." She let the implication hang. If the Council refused to bless a public mate bond between the beast and an Omega, people would ask questions, would wonder why, would start to suspect that maybe, just maybe, the wild accusations weren't so wild after all. Through their bond, Nora felt Dominic's response. It wasn't agreement or disagreement, it was fear. Deep, bone-shaking fear that had nothing to do with combat or curses. "You're afraid of the bond," Nora realized, "of what it means." Dominic turned away, and she felt the shame rolling off him in waves. He was a monster, cursed, broken, responsible for the deaths of 4 men even if he hadn't been in control. What right did he have to bind himself to her, to trap her in a bond with a creature that might never be fully human again? "Stop," Nora said firmly. She moved around to face him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I know what I'm choosing. I know what you are, what you've done, what you might become, and I'm choosing you anyway." The bond between them flared, that warmth in her chest blazing into something brighter, stronger. She felt the exact moment when Dominic's resistance crumbled, when he stopped fighting what was growing between them and simply surrendered to it. The sensation was overwhelming, like falling and flying at the same time, like every nerve in her body was suddenly alight with electricity and warmth and a rightness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Oh," Nora breathed, "is this?" Dominic made a sound that was definitely affirmation. The bond was awakening. Not complete yet, that would require the full ritual, the public acceptance, but growing stronger with every moment. And with it came something Nora hadn't expected. His memories. They flooded through the connection in fragments, impressions and emotions more than clear images. She saw flashes of his life before the curse, training with his father, the old king, learning to lead. The weight of the crown when it was placed on his head at 23 after his father's death in battle. The loneliness of ruling alone, of carrying the kingdom's burdens with no one to share them. And then she saw the betrayal. The council meeting where Vane had served wine laced with a potion that weakened Dominic's defenses. The circle of hooded figures chanting in a language that hurt to hear even in memory. The moment when the curse took hold, when Dominic felt his human form being ripped away, replaced by the beast. His screams as they dragged him to the dungeon. The first guard who'd come to chain him, and the horror when the beast took over and tore the man apart before Dominic could stop it. 6 months of that. 6 months of being trapped, aware but helpless, watching himself kill and knowing he couldn't prevent it. 6 months of losing himself piece by piece to the curse until he'd almost forgotten who he'd been. Until Nora. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." Dominic pressed his forehead against hers, and through the bond she felt his gratitude. Not just for her compassion, but for seeing him, for recognizing him when the whole world thought he was nothing but a monster. The moment was shattered by the sound of the door opening, but this time it wasn't a single visitor. It was a squadron of guards led by none other than Commander Braddock himself. He was exactly as Nora had heard described, a mountain of a man, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that looked like they could support the castle itself. His hair was iron gray, cropped military short, and his face was all hard angles and old scars. But it was his eyes that truly frightened her. They were the eyes of someone who'd killed so many times it no longer registered as significant. "Miss Belwyn," Braddock said, his voice a deep rumble. "I'm told you've chosen this creature as your champion." Dominic erupted with a roar that shook the dungeon walls. He positioned himself between Nora and the guards, every muscle coiled to attack. "Stand down," Braddock said calmly. "I'm not here to fight. Not today." "Then why are you here?" Nora demanded, one hand on Dominic's back, feeling the tremors of barely controlled rage running through him. Professional curiosity. Braddock descended the stairs, his movements economical and precise. "I've fought Lycans before. Killed 3 in the northern campaigns, but I've never fought one in a cursed form." He studied Dominic the way a butcher might study a side of beef. Interesting anatomy. The curse has elongated the muscle structure, added mass but reduced flexibility. The claws are formidable, but the balance is off. You compensate by keeping your weight low, but it costs you reach. Nora's blood ran cold. He was analyzing Dominic, finding weaknesses. "You're very confident," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Confidence comes from preparation," Braddock replied. "I've spent 6 months studying this creature, watching how it moves, how it fights, how it kills." His eyes flicked to Nora. "The council told me this day would come, that eventually someone would try to use the beast as a champion. They had me ready." "The poisoned weapon," Nora said, "the modified arena. You knew about all of it." "I helped design it." Braddock's expression didn't change. "I'm a soldier, Miss Belwyn. I follow orders, and my orders are to ensure this creature dies in that arena." "He's not a creature," Nora said fiercely. "He's King Dominic Crow, and you know it. You served under him. How can you do this?" For the first time, something flickered in Braddock's eyes. Not quite guilt, but not quite the cold certainty either. "I served the crown," he said carefully. "Whoever wears it, that's the oath I took." "Vane stole that crown," Nora shot back. "He cursed your king and locked him in this dungeon to die, and you're helping him." "Am I?" Braddock moved closer, and Dominic's growl intensified. "Or am I doing exactly what King Dominic would want me to do?" Nora blinked, confused. "A king's first duty is to his kingdom," Braddock continued, "to stability, to preventing chaos and civil war. If I refuse to fight, if I publicly question the council's authority, what do you think would happen?" He shook his head. "The kingdom would tear itself apart. Pacts would choose sides. Blood would run in the streets." "So you'll just let corruption go unchallenged?" Nora couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You'll let them destroy everything Dominic built?" "I'll do my duty." Braddock turned to leave, then paused at the base of the stairs. "For what it's worth, I hope you know what you're doing. Because if that creature manages to kill me, the council will execute you both anyway. They've already written the narrative. The beast went mad, killed its tamer, had to be put down. Public safety." "Then why tell me this?" Nora demanded. "Why warn us?" Braddock was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because King Dominic once told me that loyalty without honor is just obedience. And I'd like to think I still have some honor left." He met her eyes. "Win or lose tomorrow, make it mean something." After he left, Nora sank to the ground, her mind reeling. Everything was worse than she'd thought. Even if they won the combat, even if they performed the ritual publicly, the council had already planned their execution. There was no scenario where they walked out of that arena alive. Unless they changed the game entirely. "We can't just win the fight," Nora said slowly. "We need to break this curse. During the combat, in front of everyone. Dominic made a sound of confusion. Think about it, Nora continued, her mind racing. If you transform back into your human form in the middle of the arena, in front of thousands of witnesses, the council can't deny who you are. They can't execute the rightful king without causing the exact civil war Braddock's trying to prevent. It was insane. The curse required a fully formed mate bond and the acceptance ritual, both of which needed calm and focus and time. Trying to accomplish that in the middle of a fight to the death was suicide, but it was the only chance they had. We start the ritual tonight, Nora said. Build the bond as strong as we can. Then tomorrow, in the arena, we finish it, and we pray it's enough. The second night was different from the first. Nora sat across from Dominic, their hands, her small human ones and his massive clawed ones, touching. She could feel the bond between them, that golden thread of connection, and she pulled on it deliberately, trying to strengthen it. Tell me who you are, she said softly. Not the king, not the beast. Just you. Through the bond, impressions came. Memories. The smell of pine forests in winter. The sound of his mother's laughter before she died when he was 10. The weight of responsibility settling on shoulders too young to bear it. The loneliness of power. The secret fear that he'd never be good enough, strong enough, wise enough to lead his people. You're wrong, Nora whispered. You're more than good enough. She shared her own memories in return. The orphanage cold and the hunger that never quite went away. The cook who'd slipped her extra bread and taught her to read. The garden where she had discovered that she could sense the emotions of growing things, could make plants thrive with just her touch. The bone-deep knowledge that she was meant for something more than serving wine and scrubbing floors, even if she'd never know what. Maybe this is it, she said. Maybe this is what I was meant for. To find you. To help you. The bond blazed brighter, and with it came a sensation Nora had never experienced. She felt Dominic's presence inside her mind, not as memories or emotions, but as a living consciousness. And she knew, without doubt, that he could feel her the same way. Nora. Her name, clear as a bell, though Dominic's mouth hadn't moved. His thoughts, speaking directly to hers through the bond. Dominic, she breathed. I can hear you. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. For the danger, for... Stop apologizing, Nora said firmly, both aloud and through the bond. I chose this. I choose you. Why? It was such a simple question, but it demanded a complete answer. Nora thought about lying, about giving him some noble reason about justice or duty, or saving the kingdom, but the bond wouldn't allow lies, not between them. Because when I look at you, I don't see a monster, she said quietly. I see someone who's been fighting alone for so long, carrying impossible burdens, and never once asking for help. I see someone who cares so deeply about his people that he'd rather stay cursed than risk them getting hurt in a civil war. She tightened her grip on his claws. I see someone worth saving, worth fighting for, worth loving. The last word slipped out before she could stop it, and Nora felt shock ripple through the bond, not from Dominic, but from herself, because it was true. Somehow, impossibly, in just 3 days, she'd fallen in love with a cursed king who might die tomorrow. Nora. Dominic's mental voice was rough with emotion. If this goes wrong tomorrow, if I can't control the beast, if the curse is too strong, if... Then we go down fighting, Nora interrupted. Together. Together. He leaned forward, and despite his monstrous form, despite the fangs and claws and nightmare appearance, when he pressed his forehead against hers, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The bond snapped fully into place. It was like a circuit completing, electricity surging through every nerve. Nora gasped as power flooded into her. Not her own power, but Dominic's, channeled through their connection. She could feel his strength, his will, his absolute certainty in who he was beneath the curse. And he could feel her acceptance, her belief, her love. The ritual, Dominic's voice in her mind was clearer now, stronger. We need to speak the words. I don't know them, Nora admitted. You do. Every Omega knows them. It's instinct. And he was right. As soon as he said it, the words rose in Nora's throat, ancient and powerful, passed down through countless generations of bonded pairs. I claim you, she whispered. Alpha to my Omega, strength to my heart, my chosen mate from this moment until the last. Dominic's response came not in words, but in a sound, something between a howl and a roar that echoed through the dungeon and into Nora's very soul. She felt the answering claim, felt him bind himself to her as completely as she'd bound herself to him. The bond solidified, became unbreakable, and with it came a rush of sensations. She could feel everything he felt, the ache in his muscles, the pain of the curse fighting against the bond, the fierce joy of finally not being alone. And then something else happened. Dominic's form flickered. Just for a second, Nora saw him, the real him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and those incredible green eyes she'd remembered from the spring festival. He was beautiful and fierce and hers. And then the curse slammed back down and he was the beast again. But they'd done it. They'd awakened the bond. And for one perfect moment, they'd pushed the curse back. "Tomorrow," Nora said, her voice shaking with emotion and exhaustion. "In the arena. We finished this." "In the arena," Dominic agreed. They slept curled together that night, Nora's small form tucked against Dominic's bulk, the bond between them humming like a living thing. For the first time in 6 months, Dominic slept without nightmares. For the first time in her life, Nora felt like she belonged somewhere. Dawn came too quickly. The guards arrived with the first light, accompanied by Lady Ashworth and 2 court mages. They bound Dominic in silver chains, lighter than the ones they'd used before, since they needed him able to fight, and dragged him up the spiral staircase. Nora followed, her heart pounding. This was it. Win or lose, live or die, everything came down to the next few hours. The walk to the arena felt eternal and far too short at the same time. Citizens lined the streets, some jeering, some silent, and this surprised Nora, openly cheering for her. She saw Mira in the crowd, her niece on her shoulders, both of them waving small white ribbons, the symbol of hope. The arena itself was massive, a circular stone structure that could hold 10,000 people. Every seat was filled. The crowd's noise was deafening, a roar of anticipation and bloodlust. In the center of the arena, modifications were clearly visible. Silver barriers sectioned off the fighting space into a circle no more than 50 feet across. Runes glowed along the edges. Containment magic, Nora realized, to keep Dominic trapped inside with Braddock. The council sat in the royal box, Vane at the center in Dominic's stolen throne. His smile was predatory as he stood to address the crowd. "Citizens of Silverstone Kingdom," his magically amplified voice rang out, "we are gathered to witness justice. Nora Belwyn, accused of treason and theft, has chosen trial by combat. Her champion," he gestured to Dominic, "is the very beast that has terrorized our dungeons for months." The crowd's reaction was mixed: fear, excitement, disgust. "Our champion," Vane continued, "is Commander Braddock, Defender of the Realm, undefeated in 30 years of service." Braddock entered from the opposite side of the arena. He wore minimal armor, just bracers and a chestplate, and carried a longsword that seemed to drink in the light, the nightshade-poisoned blade. "Let the combat begin," Vane declared. "To the death!" The guards released Dominic's chains and shoved Nora toward the edge of the arena. She locked eyes with Dominic one last time. "Ready?" she asked through their bond. "Ready," he confirmed. Braddock and Dominic circled each other, and the crowd fell silent in anticipation. Then Braddock attacked. He was fast. Faster than Nora had expected for a man his size. The poisoned blade flashed in the morning sun, aimed directly at Dominic's throat. But Dominic was ready. He ducked under the strike and countered with his claws, not the wild slashing of the beast, but the calculated precision of a trained warrior. The crowd gasped. This wasn't the mindless creature they'd expected. Braddock recovered quickly, adjusting his tactics. He feinted left, struck right, using his experience to probe for weaknesses. The blade caught Dominic's shoulder, drawing blood, and Nora felt the poison burning through their bond. "Dominic, I'm fine. Focus." They'd planned for this. Nora closed her eyes and reached through the bond, channeling her Omega healing energy into him. It wouldn't cure the poison, but it would slow it, buy them time. The fight intensified. Braddock was clearly skilled, but Dominic had something the commander didn't expect: intelligence. He used the confined space to his advantage, forcing Braddock into corners, limiting the older man's mobility. But the poison was working. Nora could feel Dominic weakening, the beast rising as pain and desperation took hold. "Not yet," she sent through the bond. "Hold on just a little longer." Then Braddock made his mistake. He lunged forward with a killing blow, putting all his weight behind it. But Dominic wasn't there. He'd rolled aside at the last second, and Braddock's momentum carried him too far forward. Dominic's claws found the gap between the commander's armor plates. Blood bloomed across Braddock's chest, and the commander dropped to one knee. The crowd erupted. "Yield!" Dominic's voice emerged from his monstrous throat, garbled but unmistakable. "Yield!" For a moment, Braddock just stared. Then, slowly, he dropped his sword. "I yield," he said clearly. Nora didn't wait. She ran into the arena, directly to Dominic, and grabbed his massive head in both hands. "Now!" she screamed. "We do it now!" And there, in front of 10,000 witnesses, with the council frozen in shock and the crowd utterly silent, Nora Belwyn completed the mate bond acceptance ritual. "I claim you, Dominic Crow, Lycan King of the Northern Territories, as my true mate. I accept the bond between us, now and forever. Witnessed by all gathered here. I name you mine." The bond exploded with power. Dominic threw back his head and roared. And this time it wasn't the beast. It was the king, his voice ringing with authority and magic. The curse fought back, trying to maintain its hold, but the bond was stronger. Fed by Nora's unwavering acceptance and Dominic's desperate need to reclaim himself, it tore through the curse like fire through paper. Light erupted from Dominic's form, blinding, pure white light that forced everyone to shield their eyes. When it faded, Dominic Crow stood in his true form, naked, bleeding from a dozen wounds, swaying on his feet, but human. His green eyes blazed as he looked at Vane in the royal box. "Hello, Marcus," Dominic said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "Did you miss me?" The arena had gone so silent that Nora could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. 10,000 people stared at the man standing where the beast had been moments before. Dominic Crow, the missing Lycan king, stood in the center of the arena, his chest heaving with exertion, blood running down his torso from the wounds Braddock's blade had inflicted. But he was unmistakably, undeniably human again. And he was staring directly at Marcus Vane. Vane's face had gone the color of curdled milk. He rose from the stolen throne, his hands gripping the railing of the royal box so tightly his knuckles were white. "Impossible," he breathed, though the word carried across the silent arena through the amplification magic. "The curse can't be broken. It can't." "Can't what, Marcus?" Dominic's voice was raw, unused to human speech after 6 months, but it rang with unmistakable authority. "Can't be broken by true love? By a mate bond forged in the very dungeon where you left me to rot?" He took a step forward, and despite his nakedness and wounds, every eye in the arena followed him. "Or can't be broken because you made sure to choose a curse that required the one thing you thought I'd never find?" The crowd was beginning to murmur now, a low rumble of confusion and growing understanding. "That's not King Dominic," Lady Ashworth said quickly, standing beside Vane. Her voice was steady, controlled. "It's a trick, some Omega magic to create an illusion." "Is it?" Commander Braddock's voice cut through her words. He'd risen from his kneeling position, one hand pressed against the wound in his chest, and was staring at Dominic with an expression of wonder and guilt. "Because I've served under King Dominic for 15 years. I know every scar on his body, the one on his left shoulder from the Northern Campaign, the one across his ribs from saving his father's life when he was 17, the burn mark on his right forearm from the forge accident." His voice grew stronger. "That's not an illusion, Lady Ashworth. That's my king." The rumble in the crowd grew louder. Nora moved to Dominic's side, pulling off her own thin shawl and wrapping it around his waist to preserve some modesty. Through their bond, she felt his gratitude and something else, a fierce, protective love that made her breath catch. "You can deny it all you want," Nora said, her voice ringing clear across the arena. "But everyone here just watched the curse break. Just watch the beast transform back into the man. The mate bond doesn't lie, and it can't be faked." "The girl is right," a voice called from the crowd. Nora turned to see an elderly man in the robes of a high mage standing in the common section. "I felt the bond activate, felt the curse shatter. That was real magic, council magic, breaking under the power of something stronger." He looked directly at Vane. The only question is, who cast the original curse? Vane's jaw worked silently. Then he seemed to collect himself, his politician's mask sliding back into place. Even if this man is King Dominic, he said carefully, he abandoned his throne, disappeared for 6 months without word, leaving the kingdom in chaos. The council was forced to step in, to provide stability and leadership in his absence. I didn't abandon anything. Dominic's roar silenced Vane mid-sentence. You poisoned me in my own throne room. You and your cabal of spineless sycophants gathered in secret and performed a dark ritual that tore away my humanity and locked me in that cursed form. He gestured toward the dungeon entrance visible beyond the arena walls. You threw me in that hole and fed me guards to keep the beast raging, to keep me from ever finding the one person who could break the curse. Lies, Vane spat. The desperate fabrications of a man who— Then explain the timing, Braddock interrupted. The commander had moved to stand beside Dominic, his posture clearly protective despite his injury. Explain why the beast appeared the exact night King Dominic disappeared. Explain why you refused to let anyone but select guards near the dungeon. Explain why you commissioned a nightshade-poisoned weapon 6 months ago, specifically designed to kill a lichen in beast form. Vane's eyes narrowed. You were supposed to be loyal, Commander. I am loyal, Braddock said quietly. To the crown, not to the man who stole it. The crowd's murmur had become a roar. People were standing now, shouting questions, demanding answers. Nora could see guards moving through the masses, but they seemed uncertain, half moving to contain the crowd, half looking toward the royal box for orders that weren't coming. People of Silverstone, Dominic's voice cut through the chaos. I know you have questions. I know this seems impossible, but I'm asking you to trust what you've seen with your own eyes. I was cursed by members of my own council, locked away to die, while they systematically dismantled everything I built. The Omega taxes, the land sales, the executions of loyal pack leaders. His voice broke slightly. I couldn't stop them. I could only rage and suffer and pray that somehow, someday, I'd find a way back to you. And we're supposed to just believe that? Someone shouted from the crowd. When supposed to accept that our council turned traitor? Not all of us. A new voice rang out. Lord Pemberton emerged from the crowd section, his face grim. Some of us had no idea. I voted for the Omega taxes because Vane said they were necessary to fund border defenses. I approved the land sales because I was told the kingdom needed the gold. He looked at Vane with naked disgust. I believed you when you said King Dominic had abandoned us. As did I, another voice called. Baron Creed stepped forward from a different section. I trusted the council's judgment, trusted that our actions were in the kingdom's best interest. His young face was twisted with anguish. But if this is true, if we've been deceived, then we've betrayed our own king. This is absurd, Lady Ashworth said, but her voice had lost its certainty. You'd condemn the entire council on the word of a man who just spent 6 months as a beast? On the claims of an Omega servant girl? That Omega servant girl just saved your king's life. Mira's voice rang out from the crowd. She'd pushed her way to the front, her knees still on her shoulders. She went into that dungeon knowing she'd probably die. She spent 3 days with a creature that had killed 4 men, and she didn't run, didn't give up. She saw what no one else could see, that the beast was still a man, that our king was still fighting. Other voices joined hers, servants mostly. Omegas and betas who'd suffered under Vane's policies, people who'd lost family members to the executions, who'd been taxed into poverty, who'd watched their kingdoms slowly crumble. I believe her, someone shouted. So do I, another voice called. King Dominic would never have abandoned us, a third person yelled. Vane's been lying from the start. The crowd was turning. Nora could see it happening in real time, the shift from confusion to understanding to rage. These people had suffered. They'd been told their suffering was necessary, that their king had abandoned them, and now they were learning it had all been a lie. Vane must have seen it too, because his expression shifted from defensive to dangerous. Guards, he shouted. Arrest them, the Beastman and the Omega both. They're using illegal magic to deceive the people. This is treason of the highest order. But the guards didn't move. They stood frozen, looking between Vane and Dominic, uncertainty written across every face. That's an order, Vane screamed. Countermanded, Dominic said quietly, but his voice carried. I am the rightful king of this realm. I have broken the curse through legal means. Trial by combat, won fairly, and a mate bond witnessed by thousands. By law and by right, I reclaim my throne. You can't, Vane said desperately. The council hasn't verified your identity. There are protocols, processes. Then verify it, Dominic said. He gestured to the high mage who'd spoken earlier. Master Aldrich, you've known me since I was a boy. You taught me magic theory when I was 10. You were there when my father died and when I took the crown. Look at me. Tell these people who I am. The old mage stepped forward, his weathered face grave. He approached Dominic slowly, then raised a hand glowing with soft blue light. The magic washed over Dominic, and Nora felt it through their bond. Not intrusive, but searching, verifying. After a long moment, Master Aldrich lowered his hand. This is Dominic Crow, he said clearly, son of King Aldrich the Just, inheritor of the Lycan bloodline, rightful king of Silverstone. There is no illusion, no deception. This is the man who disappeared 6 months ago. He turned to face the royal box. And if he was cursed as he claims, then someone in that box is guilty of regicide and treason. The arena erupted. Vane stumbled backward, his face contorted with rage and fear. Lady Ashworth grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. 2 other council members, a thin man in green robes and a heavy-set woman with silver hair, had gone pale as corpses. This isn't over, Vane said, his voice shaking. Even if you are King Dominic, you can't prove the council cursed you. You can't prove— Actually, we can, a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see a cloaked figure stepping out from the shadows beneath the royal box. When she threw back her hood, Nora gasped. It was Mira's aunt, the former lady's maid, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and her eyes blazing with determination. My name is Helena Marsh, she said, and I was present the night of the curse. Vane's face went from white to red. You were sent away. You left the castle. I was supposed to leave, Helena corrected. You paid me well to disappear and keep my mouth shut about what I'd seen. But I stayed. I've been working in the lower kitchens for 6 months, watching, waiting, hoping that someday the truth would come out. She pulled a small leather journal from her cloak, and I wrote down everything, every conversation I overheard, every secret meeting, every piece of the conspiracy. She opened the journal and began to read. 16th day of the autumn month, year 1247. Witness council meeting in the West Tower at midnight. Present, Magistrate Marcus Vane, Lady Catherine Ashworth, Lord Edward Grimm, and Councillor Sarah Blackwood. Discussion centered on removing the king permanently without martyrdom. Lady Ashworth proposed a curse, citing contacts with dark mages from the Shadowlands. Vane lurched forward. That journal is fabricated. This woman is lying. 23rd day of autumn month, Helena continued, her voice growing stronger. Overheard conversation between Vane and a hooded stranger in the East Gardens. Stranger delivered a vial of purple liquid. Vane paid with a chest of gold. Heard the word bloodbane, the potion required to weaken a Lycan's natural defenses before cursing. Stop her! Lady Ashworth shrieked. Lady Tit. But Braddock had moved to stand in front of Helena, his sword, the poisoned one he'd dropped, now back in his hand and pointed at the royal box. Let her speak, he said quietly. Helena's eyes met Dominic's, and Nora saw tears streaming down the older woman's face. First day of winter month, she said, her voice breaking. The curse was cast. I watched from the servants' passage, saw the king collapse during the council meeting, saw the 4 of them circle him, chanting in a language that made my ears bleed, saw his form twist and change until the beast stood where the man had been. She closed the journal. I saw them drag him to the dungeon, heard Vane say, feed him guards, keep him angry, make sure no Omega ever gets close enough to calm him, and then they locked the door and left him there to suffer. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Dominic spoke, and his voice was cold as winter ice. Marcus Vane, Catherine Ashworth, Edward Grimm, Sarah Blackwood, you are hereby charged with high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, illegal use of dark magic, and crimes against the crown. You will be taken into custody immediately to await trial. This is illegal, Vane shouted. You can't charge sitting council members without a formal hearing. I'm the king, Dominic said flatly. I can do whatever I want. But if you'd like a formal hearing, we can certainly arrange one. I'm sure the people would love to hear you try to explain your way out of eyewitness testimony, a written record, and the fact that I'm standing here, curse broken, very much alive and very, very angry. Guards were moving now, finally responding to their true king's authority. They surrounded the royal box, and Nora saw the four conspirators realize they had nowhere to run. Vane's face twisted into something ugly. His hand moved to his belt, to that small vial he'd threatened Dominic with in the dungeon, and Nora felt ice shoot through her veins. If I can't have the throne, Vane snarled, neither can you. He hurled the vial directly at Dominic. Everything happened at once. Braddock lunged forward, his warrior reflexes driving him to intercept. Nora threw herself toward Dominic, some instinct screaming at her to protect her mate. And Dominic, weakened and wounded, could only raise his arms in a futile attempt to shield himself. The vial shattered against Braddock's chest. Purple smoke erupted, the same sickly color as the potion that had enabled the curse, and the commander screamed. His body convulsed, skin rippling as the concentrated curse magic slammed into him with the force of a battering ram. No! Dominic caught Braddock as the older man collapsed. Helena, get Master Aldrich, now! But Nora could see it was too late. The magic was too strong, too concentrated. Braddock's breathing was already slowing, his eyes glazing over. He'd taken a dose meant to recurse a Lycan king, absorbed it with a human body, and it was killing him. Sir! Braddock gasped, his hand clutching Dominic's arm. Sorry, I didn't believe. Should have questioned. You did your duty, Dominic said, his voice breaking. You protected your king. That's all I ever asked. The girl, Braddock wheezed, his eyes finding Nora. She was right, worth fighting for. Then his eyes closed, and his hand went limp. Dominic's roar of grief and rage shook the arena. Through their bond, Nora felt the full weight of his anguish, not just for Braddock, but for all of it. 6 months of suffering, 4 guards dead by his own clawed hands, a loyal commander poisoned trying to save him, a kingdom nearly destroyed by the very people sworn to protect it. Take them, Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. All 4. Lock them in the same dungeon where they kept me. Let them see how it feels. The guards moved swiftly now, dragging Vane and his co-conspirators away. Vane was screaming something about appeals and legal rights, but no one was listening. The crowd was surging forward, not in violence, but in something like celebration mixed with grief. King Dominic, someone shouted. King Dominic has returned. The chant was taken up by others, spreading through the arena like wildfire. King Dominic! King Dominic! King Dominic! But Dominic wasn't listening. He was cradled Braddock's body, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Nora knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him as best she could, letting him feel her presence through the bond. I'm here. You're not alone. Master Aldrich approached, his expression grave. Your Majesty, I'm sorry about the commander. He was a good man. The best, Dominic said hoarsely. He looked up at the old mage. Can you? I'll ensure he receives a hero's burial, Aldrich promised. With full military honors, he paused. But right now, your people need to see you. Need to know their king has truly returned. Dominic nodded slowly. With Nora's help, he rose to his feet, leaving Braddock's body in the gentle hands of the healers who'd rushed forward. Someone, Nora thought it might have been Lord Pemberton, had brought him a cloak, which he wrapped around himself. Then, with Nora at his side, Dominic Crowe faced his people. The crowd's roar was deafening. 10,000 voices raised in joy and relief and vindication. Some were crying, some were laughing. Many were doing both. People of Silverstone, Dominic said, and the amplification magic carried his words to every corner of the arena. I have been gone too long. I have failed you in ways I cannot fully express. But I swear to you now, on my crown and on my life, that I will spend every day of my reign making this right. The corrupt will be punished. The innocent will be protected. And never again will this kingdom suffer under the rule of those who seek power for its own sake. The cheering intensified. But I didn't do this alone, Dominic continued. He reached for Nora's hand, threading his fingers through hers. This woman, Nora Belwyn, saw through the curse when everyone else saw only a monster. She risked her life to save mine. She fought when she had every reason to run, and she completed a mate bond with me knowing it might destroy us both. He looked at her, and the love in his eyes made Nora's breath catch. She is my mate, my Omega, and if you'll accept her, she will be your queen. Nora's mind went blank. Queen? She was a kitchen servant, an orphan with no family, no status, no training for... Breathe, Dominic's voice in her mind was gentle. You already did the hard part. Everything else is just details. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. If they'd cheered for Dominic, they roared for Nora. She saw Mira jumping up and down, her niece waving wildly, saw Helena wiping tears from her eyes, saw hundreds of Omegas in the crowd holding up those white ribbons of hope, tears streaming down their faces. I don't know how to be a queen, Nora whispered, too quietly for anyone but Dominic to hear. Then we'll figure it out together, he whispered back, just like we figured out everything else. Master Aldrich stepped forward, producing a simple silver crown from his robes, not the elaborate one that had sat on Vane's stolen throne, but an older one, worn smooth by generations of use. This was your father's, he said to Dominic, and his father's before him. It's been waiting for you. Dominic knelt, and Aldrich placed the crown on his head. When he rose, he was every inch the king, bloodied, exhausted, grief-stricken, but unbroken. Then he turned to Nora. I don't have a crown for you yet, he said, but I have this. He unfastened a chain from around his neck, one Nora hadn't noticed before, hidden beneath the cloak. Hanging from it was a simple silver ring set with a green stone that matched his eyes. This was my mother's, Dominic said softly. She wore it until the day she died. My father gave it to me on his deathbed and told me to save it for the woman who would stand beside me, not because of what I could give her, but because of who I was. His hands were shaking as he fastened the chain around Nora's neck. I think he'd be happy knowing it's yours. Nora touched the ring, feeling the weight of history and love and responsibility settle around her throat like a promise. Thank you, she whispered. The crowd was still cheering, but Nora barely heard them. She was focused entirely on Dominic, on the bond humming between them, on the future they were building together from the ashes of the conspiracy that had tried to destroy them both. Lord Pemberton approached, bowing low. Your Majesty, the council chambers await. We have much to discuss, restoring order, reversing the harmful policies, addressing the people's grievances. And bringing the traitors to justice, Baron Creed added, his young face hard with determination. They have to pay for what they've done. They will, Dominic promised. But first, we honor the fallen. Commander Braddock gave his life to protect his king. That sacrifice will not be forgotten. The arena gradually emptied as Dominic gave orders, coordinating with the loyal council members and the guard captains who'd never stopped being loyal, even when they'd thought their king was gone. Healers attended to his wounds, though he waved away most of their attention, insisting others needed help more. Through it all, Nora stayed at his side. She had no official role yet, no clear duties, but she found herself making decisions anyway, directing servants to bring water for the crowd, suggesting that Helena be recognized publicly for her bravery, quietly pointing out to Dominic which guards had hesitated to follow Vane's orders and which had moved immediately to arrest the traitors. You're a natural, Dominic murmured during a brief moment of quiet. I'm terrified, Nora admitted. Good. So am I. He squeezed her hand. That means we'll be careful, thoughtful. We won't take this responsibility lightly. As the sun began to set, casting the arena in shades of gold and crimson, Dominic finally allowed himself to be led back to the castle. The crowd lined the streets again, but this time they were cheering, not jeering, throwing flowers instead of insults. Nora saw children hoisted on their parents' shoulders to get a glimpse of their king, saw elderly Omegas weeping with relief, saw the hope on faces that had been worn down by 6 months of Vane's cruel policies. This was what they'd fought for. Not just Dominic's freedom or Nora's life, but this, the possibility of something better. A kingdom where strength meant protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them, where an Omega servant could stand beside a king and be accepted, where justice mattered more than power. They still had so far to go. The traitors still needed to be tried. The damage Vane had done needed to be undone. And Nora had to learn how to be a queen when, just yesterday, she'd been scrubbing pots in the kitchen. But as they passed through the castle gates, with the bond between them strong and steady, Nora felt something she'd never felt before. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of a condemned prisoner, but the solid, unshakable hope of someone who'd faced the worst and survived, who'd loved fiercely and been loved in return, who'd changed the world simply by refusing to give up. The castle's servants lined the halls, and when they saw Dominic and Nora, they dropped into deep bows and curtsies. But Dominic stopped them. "No," he said gently, "not tonight. Tonight, we're all just people who survived something terrible together." He looked at each face. "Tomorrow, we'll start building something better. But tonight, we rest and remember those who didn't make it." Mira pushed through the crowd, her niece still on her shoulders. "Your Majesty, Miss Nora." She bowed, but there was joy in her face. "We wanted to thank you. My sister's debt was forgiven the moment the new council took over. My niece is coming home." The little girl, no more than 7, looked at Nora with wide eyes. "Are you really going to be queen?" she asked in a shy whisper. Nora knelt down to the child's level. "I really am. And you know what that means?" The girl shook her head. "It means things are going to change," Nora said firmly. "No more children being taken from their mothers. No more unfair taxes or cruel laws. Because your new queen knows what it's like to be powerless, and she's never going to forget." The girl smiled, a bright, beautiful smile that lit up her whole face. Then she reached out and placed a small white ribbon in Nora's hand. "For hope," she said. Nora closed her fingers around the ribbon, feeling the tears prick her eyes. "For hope," she repeated. As they continued toward the royal chambers that would now be theirs, Dominic pulled Nora close. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I'd almost stopped believing in myself." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "For being exactly who you are." Nora leaned into him, feeling the bond pulse with warmth and love and absolute certainty. They'd won. Not just the battle, but the war. Not just their freedom, but the freedom of everyone who'd suffered under Vane's corruption. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Trials to oversee, policies to reform, a kingdom to rebuild. But tonight, they had this. Each other. The bond between them unbreakable and true. And for the first time in 6 months, when Dominic Crow closed his eyes, he knew he would sleep without nightmares. Because he wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. But sleep didn't come easily that first night. Nora stood at the window of the royal chambers, staring out at the kingdom spread below. Lights flickered in the city. More than usual, she thought. People celebrating, perhaps. Or simply staying awake, unable to believe the day's events were real. She felt Dominic approach before she heard him. The bond between them hummed constantly now, a golden thread connecting their hearts and minds. His arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and she leaned back into his warmth. "You should be resting," she murmured. "The healers said, the healers can wait." His voice was rough with exhaustion, but steady. "I needed to make sure you were real, that this was real." Nora turned in his arms, studying his face in the moonlight. The wounds Braddock's blade had inflicted were bandaged now, treated with healing salves that would leave minimal scarring. But there were other marks the healers couldn't touch. 6 months of trauma etched into the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw. "It's real," she said softly. "We're really here. You're really free. Because of you." He cupped her face in his hands. "I would have died in that dungeon without you. Stayed lost in the beast until the curse consumed everything I was." "We saved each other," Nora corrected. "You gave me a reason to fight, to believe I was worth more than what the world told me." They stood like that for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing in sync. Through the bond, Nora felt his love, his gratitude, his bone-deep relief at being human again. But she also felt his worry. "What is it?" she asked. Dominic sighed. "Tomorrow, the real work begins, the trials, the reforms, rebuilding trust with the pacts that suffered under Vane's policies." He pulled back slightly. "And navigating the politics of having an Omega Queen." You're regretting this already, Nora said, trying to keep her voice light but feeling the familiar sting of inadequacy. Never. The word was fierce, absolute. But I'm not naive, Nora. There will be resistance. Nobles who think an Omega has no place on the throne. Traditionalists who believe mate bonds should stay within the same social class. His jaw tightened. People who'll see you as my weakness instead of my strength. Let them try, Nora said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. I didn't survive a dungeon beast and a rigged trial by combat to be cowed by some pompous lords who've never faced real hardship. Dominic's laugh was genuine, joyful. There she is, my fierce Omega Queen. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dominic tensed, old reflexes from 6 months of constant threat, but Nora felt through the bond that it was a friendly presence. Enter, Dominic called. Master Aldrich stepped into the chamber, his robes somehow still immaculate despite the day's chaos. Forgive the intrusion, your majesties, but there's been a development. Nora's stomach clenched. The conspirators? Escaped, Aldrich said grimly. Lady Ashworth, Lord Grimm, and Councillor Blackwood managed to break free during transport to the dungeon. They had help, guards loyal to the old regime, we believe. Marcus Vane is still secure, but the others are gone. Dominic's fury blazed through the bond, making Nora wince. But when he spoke, his voice was controlled. How many guards were involved? We're still determining that, but your majesty, there's more. Aldrich's expression grew even graver. Before they escaped, Lady Ashworth sent a message to the northern border pacts. She's claiming you're an imposter, that the curse breaking was staged, that this is all an elaborate conspiracy to seize power. That's insane, Nora said. Thousands of people witnessed the transformation. We have Helena's testimony, the journal. Logic doesn't matter to those who benefit from chaos, Aldrich interrupted gently. The northern pacts have been semi-autonomous for years. They resent the crown's authority. If Ashworth can convince them you're illegitimate, they might use it as an excuse to declare independence. Dominic began pacing, his tactical mind clearly working through scenarios. Who leads the northern pacts now? Alpha Garrick Stonefang. He's young, ambitious, and has no love for the crown after his father was executed 6 months ago. Executed by Vane, Dominic said bitterly, for supporting me, for questioning the council's authority. He stopped pacing, facing Aldrich. Garrick thinks I abandoned his father, let him die without intervention. Yes, your majesty. Through the bond, Nora felt Dominic's anguish. Another casualty of Vane's conspiracy. Another wound to heal. Then we go to him Nora said suddenly. Both men turned to stare at her. We go to the northern pacts. Face Garrick directly. Let him see with his own eyes that you're real, that the curse was real, that his father's death meant something. That's too dangerous, Dominic said immediately. If Ashworth's already poisoned them against us, then what's the alternative? Wait here while they raise an army? Let the kingdom tear itself apart in civil war? Nora moved closer to him. You said it yourself, trust has to be rebuilt. That doesn't happen from a throne room, it happens face to face. Aldrich was nodding slowly. The girl has a point, your majesty. A show of faith, a willingness to be vulnerable. That's what leadership requires. It's what will get us killed, Dominic countered. But through the bond, Nora felt his resistance weakening. He knew she was right. We'll take a small guard, Nora pressed. Travel light and fast, arrive before Ashworth can fortify her position. She took his hands. You've spent 6 months powerless. Don't let fear make you powerless again. The words hit home. Dominic's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, they held resignation and determination in equal measure. We leave at dawn, he said. The journey north took 3 days of hard riding. Dominic insisted on a contingent of 20 guards, loyal men who'd served under Braddock and had immediately recognized their true king. Lord Pemberton came as well, representing the Reformed Council, and Helena insisted on joining as the primary witness to the conspiracy. Nora had never been more than a day's ride from the castle in her life. Now she found herself traversing mountain passes and dense forests, sleeping in rough camps, eating trail rations that made the castle's leftovers seem like feasts. Her body ached from the saddle, her hands were blistered from holding the reins, and she'd never felt more alive. Through the bond, she felt Dominic's constant vigilance. He barely slept, always alert for ambush or betrayal. The trauma of the curse hadn't magically disappeared with the transformation. He still flinched at unexpected sounds, still fought the urge to lash out when startled. But he was healing. Slowly, gradually, becoming more of himself with each day. On the second night, while the guards slept and Nora was supposed to be resting, she found Dominic at the edge of camp, staring into the darkness. "You can't protect me from everything," she said quietly, settling beside him. "I can try." His voice was raw. "I failed to protect this kingdom, failed to see the conspiracy forming under my nose, failed Braddock and Garrick's father and everyone who suffered because I was too trusting." "You were betrayed," Nora said firmly. "That's not the same as failing, and you're here now, making it right. That's what matters." "Is it?" He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. "How many more people will suffer before I fix what they broke? How many will die because I wasn't strong enough to prevent the curse?" Nora took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Listen to me. The curse wasn't your weakness. It was theirs. They were so afraid of your strength, your compassion, your ability to unite people. They had to resort to dark magic to stop you. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous to those who profit from division." She felt the exact moment her words reached him through the bond. A shift, subtle but profound, as he began to believe them. "When did you get so wise?" he asked, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I had a good teacher," Nora said. "A cursed king who fought for 6 months to stay himself despite everything trying to take that away. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." They reached the Northern Territories on the third day. The landscape changed dramatically. Rolling hills gave way to jagged peaks, dense forests to rocky highlands. The air was colder here, sharp with the promise of early snow. And everywhere Nora looked, she saw evidence of Vane's policies. Abandoned farms, villages with too few people, the hollow-eyed stares of those who'd survived but barely. "It's worse than I thought," Dominic murmured, as they rode through a settlement where children watched them pass with wary suspicion instead of curiosity. "They don't know you're back," Lord Pemberton said. "Ashworth's message reached them before we did. They think we're the enemy." The Stonefang Pack's stronghold was carved into the mountain itself, a fortress of stone and timber that looked like it had grown organically from the rock. Guards lined the walls, arrows nocked and ready. As Dominic's group approached, a massive gate swung open and a single figure emerged. Alpha Garrick Stonefang was perhaps 25, with the build of a warrior and the eyes of someone who'd seen too much death too young. His dark hair was pulled back in a wolf-tail braid, and scars crisscrossed his bare arms, marks of status among the northern packs. "That's close enough," Garrick called out when they were still 50 yards from the gate. "State your business." Dominic dismounted, and Nora immediately followed suit, standing at his shoulder. Through the bond, she felt his nervousness masked by royal composure. "I am Dominic Crow, Lycan King of Silverstone," Dominic said, his voice carrying across the distance. "I've come to speak with you about your father's death and the conspiracy that stole 6 months from both of us." Garrick's laugh was bitter. "Dominic Crow is dead, or cursed, or hiding like a coward. The stories change depending on who's telling them. But whoever you are, you're not welcome here." "I am exactly who I claim to be," Dominic said steadily. "And I can prove it. Your father, Theron Stonefang, came to my court 4 years ago seeking arbitration in a border dispute with the Western Pacts. We stayed up until dawn working out a solution, and in that time he told me about his son, about how you'd saved your sister from a rock slide when you were 12, how you'd broken your leg doing it but never complained, how proud he was of your courage." Garrick's expression flickered. "Anyone could have learned that story." "And he told me his greatest fear," Dominic continued, his voice softening, "that he'd die in battle before seeing you take a mate, before meeting his grandchildren. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure you knew he loved you, that he was proud of you, that his only regret was not telling you that more often." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. "My father died believing you'd abandoned him," Garrick said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "He was executed for questioning the council, for demanding to know where you were, and you did nothing." "Because I couldn't," Dominic said, anguish bleeding through every word. I was locked in a dungeon, cursed into a beast form, unable to speak or reason or do anything except rage and suffer. They made me kill guards, Garrick, good men who were just doing their jobs. They made me into a monster so they could rule in my name. Convenient story, Garrick said, but he was wavering. Nora could see it in his posture, hear it in his voice. It's the truth, thus Helena called out, stepping forward. I witnessed the curse being cast. I documented everything, and I can tell you that King Dominic fought every moment of those 6 months to hold on to himself. Your father's execution haunted him. I heard him howling in grief the night it happened. Even the beast understood that loss. Garrick's jaw worked silently. Then he looked at Nora. And who are you? He asked. Nora Belwyn, she said, lifting her chin. His mate, the Omega who broke the curse. An Omega broke a curse cast by the High Council? Garrick's skepticism was palpable. How? Through a mate bond, Nora said simply. Through love and faith and refusing to see a monster where a man stood. Through being exactly what the conspirators never expected, someone who believed in him when he'd almost stopped believing in himself. Something in her words must have resonated, because Garrick's expression softened fractionally. Lady Ashworth sent word that you're imposters, he said, that this is all a trick to consolidate power. Then test us, Dominic challenged. However you want. Truth magic, blood verification, trial by combat, name it. I'll submit to anything that proves who I am. And if you fail, Garrick asked. Then execute us both, Dominic said flatly. Because if I'm not who I claim, then I have no right to the throne. And this kingdom deserves better than another liar wearing a stolen crown. The boldness of the statement clearly caught Garrick off guard. He studied Dominic for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Truth magic, he said, witnessed by the pack elders. If you're lying, if any of this is deception, the magic will reveal it. Agreed, Dominic said without hesitation. They were led into the stronghold through corridors carved from living rock and decorated with the bones and pelts of legendary hunts. The pack elders waited in a great hall heated by 3 massive fireplaces. 7 of them, ranging in age from weathered to ancient, sat in a semicircle facing a raised platform. The oldest, a woman whose white hair fell past her waist, gestured for Dominic to approach. Kneel, she commanded. Dominic knelt. The woman produced a silver bowl filled with a luminescent blue liquid. Drink, she said. The truth water will bind your tongue to honesty. Any lie will poison you. Nora felt Dominic's spike of fear through the bond, not of the truth, but of poison, of being vulnerable again. But he took the bowl and drank without hesitation. State your name, the elder commanded. Dominic Aldrich Crow, son of King Aldrich the Just, Lycan King of Silverstone and the Northern Territories. The liquid in the remaining bowl glowed brighter. Truth. Were you cursed by your own council? Yes, by Marcus Vane, Catherine Ashworth, Edward Grimm, and Sarah Blackwood. The glow intensified. Did you order the execution of Theron Stonefang? No, I was already cursed when he died, trapped in beast form, unable to speak or act on his behalf. Still glowing. Do you claim this Omega as your true mate? Dominic's eyes found Nora's across the hall. Yes, she is my mate, my queen, and the reason I'm standing here instead of lost forever to the curse. The bowl's glow became almost blinding. The elder nodded slowly. The truth water does not lie. This is Dominic Crow. She looked at Garrick. Your king has returned. Garrick stood frozen for a moment. Then slowly he dropped to one knee. Your Majesty, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Forgive me. I should have known. Should have believed. There's nothing to forgive, Dominic said, moving to raise Garrick to his feet. You protected your people when you thought I'd abandoned them. That's exactly what I would have wanted. He gripped Garrick's shoulders. Your father would be proud of you. I'm proud of you. The young Alpha's composure cracked. Tears streamed down his face as he embraced his king, not a formal gesture, but something raw and real. They took him from me, Garrick said brokenly. Took him, and I couldn't save him. I know, Dominic said. I know. And we'll make them answer for it, all of them. Through the bond, Nora felt Dominic's own grief surfacing. The 2 men held each other, mourning together, and something shifted in the room. The elders' expressions softened. The guards relaxed their stances. This was healing. Real, messy, painful healing. When they finally pulled apart, Garrick wiped his eyes and straightened his spine. "The Northern Packs stand with you, Your Majesty," he said formally. "Whatever you need, we're yours." "I need you to spread the word," Dominic said. "To every pack, every settlement. The curse is broken. The conspirators will face justice, and anyone who suffered under Vane's policies will have their grievances addressed." "Consider it done," Garrick said. But before they could continue, alarms rang through the stronghold. "Attack!" someone shouted. "Forces approaching from the south." They rushed to the walls and Nora's heart sank. An army, at least 500 strong, was advancing on the stronghold. And at its head, mounted on a white horse and carrying a banner that bore the old council's seal, was Lady Catherine Ashworth. "She must have been gathering loyalists," Lord Pemberton said grimly, "preparing for this." "She can't win," Garrick said. "Not against the fortress. But she can lay siege, starve us out. Unless we meet them in open combat," Dominic said. "That's suicide," Garrick protested. "We have maybe 200 fighters here. They have more than twice that." "But we have something they don't," Nora said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "We have the truth. And we have a king who just proved his identity beyond doubt." "What are you suggesting?" Dominic asked. "Let me go out there," Nora said. "Let me talk to them. Soldier to soldier, person to person. Let me tell them what really happened." "Absolutely not," Dominic said immediately. "It's too dangerous. Ashworth would kill you on sight." "She can't," Nora interrupted. "Not in front of 500 witnesses. Not without proving everything we've said about her." She gripped his hands. "Trust me. Trust the bond between us. I can feel it. Those soldiers down there, they're not all loyalists. Some are just following orders. Some don't know the truth. Give me a chance to reach them." Through the bond, she felt his terror at the thought of risking her, but also his recognition that she was right. "I'm going with you," he said finally. "No," Nora said gently. "If we both go and something happens, the kingdom loses everything. But if I go alone, I'm just an omega, harmless, unthreatening." She smiled. "Let me use their assumptions against them." Dominic pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. "If anything happens to you, it won't," Nora promised. "We didn't survive everything we've been through just to fail now." 20 minutes later, Nora rode alone through the gates of the stronghold, carrying a white flag of parley. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her spine straight, her gaze forward. The army waited, weapons drawn but held at rest. As Nora approached, she saw their faces, young and old, scared and hardened, uncertain and angry. Not the faceless enemy she'd imagined, but people, just people caught up in forces beyond their control. Lady Ashworth rode forward to meet her, her beautiful face twisted with contempt. "The little Omega," she sneered. "Come to beg for mercy?" "I've come to offer truth," Nora said loudly, making sure her voice carried to the soldiers behind Ashworth. "These people deserve to know who they're fighting for." "They're fighting for stability," Ashworth said. "For a return to proper order after your chaos." "A proper order?" Nora's laugh was sharp. "Is that what you call cursing your own king? Locking him in a dungeon for 6 months while you bled the kingdom dry? Executing loyal pack leaders who dared to question you?" Murmurs rippled through the army. Ashworth's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Careful, girl. You're surrounded by my forces. One word from me and you prove everything I've said is true," Nora interrupted. "You want these soldiers to believe I'm lying? Then answer me in front of them. Explain why you commissioned a curse from dark mages. Explain why Helena Marsh's journal details your conspiracy step by step. Explain why you fled instead of standing trial." "That journal is fabricated," Ashworth spat. "And Helena is a disgruntled servant seeking revenge." "Then submit to truth magic," Nora challenged. "Right here, right now. Drink truth water like King Dominic did in the Stonefang stronghold. Prove your innocence in front of these people you're asking to die for you." Ashworth's face went pale, then red. "I don't have to prove anything to you." "But you do have to prove it to them," Nora said, gesturing to the army. She raised her voice. "King Dominic Crow has returned. The curse is broken. He stands ready to reclaim his throne and restore justice to this kingdom. But he won't do it through violence if it can be avoided. He's offering amnesty to anyone who lays down their weapons. Full pardons for those who were deceived. A chance to be part of rebuilding instead of destroying. "She's lying!" Ashworth screamed. "Dominic Crow is—" "Right here," Dominic's voice rang out. Nora turned to see him riding through the gates, flanked by Garrick and the pack elders. He'd armed himself, not in full battle armor, but in the ceremonial garb of the Lycan king, crown gleaming in the late afternoon sun. The effect on the army was immediate and dramatic. Soldiers began lowering their weapons, staring in shock and awe. Some dropped to their knees. "I am Dominic Crow," he said, his voice carrying across the field with supernatural clarity. "I was betrayed by members of my own council, cursed and imprisoned while they ruled in my name. But I have returned, and I offer you all a choice. Stand with me in rebuilding this kingdom, or stand aside and let justice be served. But I will not ask you to die for a conspiracy you had no part in creating." "He's an imposter!" Ashworth shrieked, but her voice was lost in the growing murmur of the crowd. "If he's an imposter," a voice called from the ranks, a grizzled sergeant with gray in his beard, "then how does he know about the Battle of Grey Ridge? I served under him there. I watched him save my entire unit when we were surrounded. That man has the same scar on his neck from the blade that nearly killed him. The same way of standing, the same—" His voice broke. "The same honor." Other voices joined his, soldiers who'd served under Dominic, who'd seen him in battle, in council, in the quiet moments that defined a leader. One by one, they began laying down their weapons. "No!" Ashworth's composure shattered completely. She drew a dagger, silver-bladed, inscribed with runes, and lunged toward Nora, but Nora was already moving. The weeks of working with Dominic, of learning to read intent and movement through their bond, had taught her things she'd never known she could learn. She sidestepped the blade and grabbed Ashworth's wrist, using the woman's own momentum to throw her off balance. Ashworth hit the ground hard, the dagger skittering away. Before she could rise, Garrick's warriors had surrounded her. "It's over, Catherine," Dominic said quietly, dismounting and walking to stand beside Nora. "Surrender with dignity, or be dragged back in chains. Your choice." Ashworth looked around at the army that was no longer hers, at the forces closing in, at the king she'd tried to destroy standing tall and whole. And something in her finally broke. "I did it for the kingdom," she said, her voice hollow. "You were too weak, too concerned with fairness and compassion. The kingdom needed strength." "The kingdom needed justice," Dominic corrected, "and it will have it. You'll stand trial for your crimes. All of them." As the guards took Ashworth into custody, the army began formally surrendering. Not as defeated enemies, but as people choosing a different path, choosing their true king. The journey back to the capital took a week. They traveled slowly, stopping at every settlement, every village, every pack stronghold. Dominic met with leaders, listened to grievances, made promises he swore to keep. And everywhere they went, Nora stood beside him, not behind, not following, but equal. Word of their coming spread like wildfire. By the time they reached the capital, the streets were lined with people, thousands upon thousands, waiting to see their returned king and the Omega who'd saved him. The coronation, the real coronation, not the stolen ceremony Vane had performed, was held on the full moon, exactly 2 weeks after the curse had broken. Nora stood in the royal chambers, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. The simple servant's dress was gone, replaced by a gown of silver and white that seemed to glow in the candlelight. Her dark hair was woven with pearls and moonstones. The ring Dominic had given her hung at her throat and on her head. "You look terrified," Mira said, adjusting the small crown that sat on Nora's head. Not as elaborate as Dominic's, but beautifully crafted, set with the same green stones as his mother's ring. "I am terrified," Nora admitted. "A month ago I was scrubbing pots. Now I'm about to be crowned queen in front of the entire kingdom." "You're going to be amazing," Mira said firmly. "You already are. Do you know what people are saying? That you're the bravest woman in Silverstone. That you faced down a beast, a corrupt council, and an army without flinching. That you're exactly what this kingdom needs." "They don't know me," Nora said. "They don't know I'm still just—" "Just what?" Mira interrupted. "Just an Omega? Just a servant? Nora, you were never just anything. You survived an orphanage and abuse and being framed for treason. You saw through a curse that stumped the entire High Council. You forged a mate bond with the Lycan King and broke dark magic with love. She gripped Nora's shoulders. You're not just anything. You're extraordinary. A knock at the door announced Master Aldrich. It's time, Your Majesty. The coronation ceremony was held in the Grand Cathedral, a soaring space of stone and stained glass that could hold 3,000 people. Every seat was filled. Every eye turned as Nora walked down the aisle, her hand in Dominic's. Through their bond, she felt his pride, his love, his absolute certainty that she belonged here. The ceremony itself was a blur. Words spoken in ancient languages. Blessings from the High Mage. The weight of the crown settling more firmly on her head as Dominic placed it there himself. By the power vested in me as Lycan King, Dominic said, his voice ringing through the cathedral, I crown you Nora Belwyn Crow, Queen of Silverstone, Protector of the Realm, and Guardian of the Omega rights that have been neglected for too long. The crowd erupted in cheers, but it was what came after that Nora would remember for the rest of her life. Dominic had insisted on adding a new tradition to the coronation. After the formal ceremony, they moved to the great balcony overlooking the city. Thousands more people filled the square below, and one by one, citizens were allowed to approach. First came Mira's sister, holding her 7-year-old daughter. The little girl presented Nora with a white ribbon, one of thousands that were being waved in the crowd. Thank you, the mother said, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for bringing hope back. Then came an elderly Omega man who'd lost his farm to Vane's taxes. Dominic personally handed him the deed, restored and debt-free. A young Alpha whose brother had been executed for supporting Dominic. The king embraced him, promising that his brother's sacrifice would be honored. A Beta woman who'd been forced into servitude to pay her family's debts. Now freed, with a stipend to help her rebuild. On and on it went. Hundreds of people, each with their own story of suffering and survival. And Dominic and Nora listened to everyone. When the last person had been seen, when the sun was setting and the crowd finally beginning to disperse, Nora turned to Dominic. This is what being a ruler means, she said. Not the crown or the throne, this. Yes, Dominic agreed. And we'll do it together, every day, for as long as we live. The trials of the conspirators took place over the following months. Marcus Vane was found guilty of high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, and crimes against the crown. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in the very dungeon where he'd kept Dominic, a poetic justice that the people approved of wholeheartedly. Lady Ashworth, Lord Grimm, and Councillor Blackwood faced similar charges. Ashworth's sentence was particularly harsh. She'd been the architect of the curse, the one who'd contacted the dark mages and orchestrated the entire conspiracy. She would spend the rest of her life in isolation, cut off from all magic, all power. But perhaps more important than the punishments were the reforms. The Omega Protection Act was the first law Dominic and Nora passed together. It abolished the discriminatory taxes, established equal rights regardless of designation, and created protections against exploitation. Nora personally drafted much of it, drawing on her own experiences and those of people like Mira and her sister. The Land Restoration Act returned properties seized under Vane's regime to their rightful owners, with compensation for those who'd suffered. The Pac Autonomy Agreement gave the Northern Territories more self-governance while maintaining their connection to the Crown, a balance that honored both their independence and their loyalty. And the Memorial of the Fallen established a permanent monument to those who died during the conspiracy, including Commander Braddock. His name was carved first, largest, a testament to his sacrifice. 6 months after the coronation, Nora stood in the palace gardens, the same gardens where Helena had once overheard Vane's conspiracy. But they'd been transformed. Where there had been shadows and secrets, now there was light and openness. The garden had been redesigned as a public space where any citizen could walk, could speak with their rulers, could feel ownership of the kingdom they belonged to. Dominic found her there, standing beneath a flowering tree that hadn't bloomed in years but was now covered in white blossoms. "Penny for your thoughts, my queen," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just remembering," Nora said, leaning back against him. "A year ago, I was a servant who thought she'd die in a dungeon. Now I'm..." "Everything," Dominic finished. "You're everything." Through their bond, Nora felt the truth of his words, but also something else, something new. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to need a nursery," she said quietly. Dominic went very still. Then, through the bond, she felt an explosion of joy so pure and intense it brought tears to her eyes. "A child?" he breathed. "Our child," Nora confirmed. "Due in about 7 months." Dominic swept her into his arms, spinning her around, laughing with a happiness that was infectious. When he finally set her down, there were tears on his cheeks. "A year ago, I was a beast who thought he'd die alone," he said. "Now I'm going to be a father. With you. Building a family and a kingdom we saved together." "We did save it, didn't we?" Nora said wonderingly. "The servants and the cursed king, the Omega and the Alpha. We actually did it." "We did," Dominic agreed. "And we'll keep doing it every day, through whatever comes next." The years that followed brought challenges. There were always challenges. Neighboring kingdoms that tested their borders, internal politics that required careful navigation, the constant work of maintaining justice and fairness in a world that often preferred the opposite. But there were triumphs, too. Mira became the head of a new department focused on Omega rights and welfare, her personal experience making her invaluable in shaping policy. Garrick Stonefang found a mate of his own, a fierce beta warrior who united the northern and eastern packs through their bond. Helena published her journal, which became required reading in every school, ensuring that future generations would know the true cost of corruption. And the child Nora carried, a daughter born with her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes, grew up in a kingdom that valued her not for her designation, but for who she was. She was named Brenna, after the old word for strength, and she would be the first heir to the throne born of a mated Omega Alpha pair in 3 generations. On the 10th anniversary of Dominic's return, they held a celebration in the arena, not a trial or a battle, but a festival. Music and dancing, food and laughter, thousands of people gathered in the place where a cursed king had transformed back into a man. Nora stood with Dominic in the center of it all, their daughter on his shoulders, and looked out at the faces surrounding them. Rich and poor, Alpha and Omega and Beta, from every corner of the kingdom, all of them free, all of them protected under laws that valued justice over power. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened?" Dominic asked quietly. "If they'd thrown someone else into that dungeon? If you died before breaking the curse?" "Sometimes," Nora admitted. "But then I remember, it had to be us. The bond was always there, waiting. We just had to be brave enough to claim it." "You were brave enough," Dominic corrected. "I was the one who needed saving." "We saved each other," Nora said, as she always did. "That's how it works." As the sun set over the kingdom, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nora thought about the girl she'd been. The frightened servant in a dungeon, certain she was going to die. That girl could never have imagined this. The crown on her head, the child in her mate's arms, the kingdom that looked to her for guidance and protection, but she'd always had it in her. The strength, the courage, the refusal to accept that her circumstances defined her worth. She just needed someone to see it. And Dominic had seen it, even when he was lost in the darkness of the curse. They'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances, a condemned Omega and a cursed king thrown together in a dungeon designed to be a tomb. And they'd turned it into a beginning. The story of the cursed king and his Omega queen became legend. It was told around fires and in great halls, in servant quarters and throne rooms. Each telling added new details, new embellishments, but the core truth remained. Love could break any curse. Courage could overcome any obstacle. And sometimes, the people the world dismissed as worthless were exactly the ones who changed everything. Nora Belwyn had started as nobody, an orphan, a servant, an Omega with no status or power. But she'd become somebody. Not because of a crown or a title, but because she'd chosen to be brave when it would have been easier to give up. Because she'd seen worth in a beast everyone else feared. Because she'd believed in a better world and fought to create it. And in the end, that was the legacy she left. Not just for her daughter or her kingdom, but for every person who'd ever been told they didn't matter. They did matter. They always had. And sometimes, if they were brave enough to believe it, they could change the world.